Hey everyone, we have a woman on with us today who's worn many hats, and it's her perspective of life that really just blows me away. We're going to talk more about that in today's episode on the experience of firsts. Meredith Avakian is a writer, spoken word poet, keynote speaker, storyteller, author, artist, conscious communications coach. She's a consultant. She's worked in the field of public relations for over 20 years. And while that seems like one hell of a resume, it's really the way in which she navigates life on her journey of firsts, finding a first every single day. This is going to be an eye-opening conversation and hopefully changes the way that you navigate life. So without further ado, join me for today's episode on the Mindrise podcast with Meredith Avakian. All right, guys. So we are on with Mindrise coach Jen Wiledge and our special guest for today, Meredith Avakian. I'm really excited to have this conversation about Meredith's journey into not only creating her business, but the way she just embraces life. Meredith and I met a number of years ago at this point, and in our first conversation, she explains to me this concept, this perspective of firsts. And I mean, I have to say, I like to think that I've read a lot, I've done a lot of research, I a little woo-woo myself, and I never heard this perspective before. And still to this date, aside from that conversation with Meredith, I have never met anybody who approaches life like this. And not only is it refreshing, but I think that it's something that we can all jump on to to owning this experience of life. So Meredith, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Bailey. And it's so full circle and synchronistic, which I know you love as well, especially to be here with you and Jen, since I met both of you as part of firsts that I was experiencing between meeting Jen at Yoga Farm and my first class there, as well as meeting you and connecting with you at SOAR, which was also my first time. It was that year at the Detour art gallery in Red Bank, only to find out that there are so many more firsts that we would share and experience together as well.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And here we are, which I don't know if you've done a podcast before, but is this a first?
So I think technically it's interesting. Maybe I feel like I had to have, but I feel like I've prepped so many executives and other folks for their podcasts that I'm like, wait, was it mine or was I the one like holding the Post-its with the answers behind the curtain type of thing? Because that was most of my career. I've done several IG live, but I don't, maybe this is. And it's certainly my first one about the first. So it's very fitting. And I'm here on First Avenue while I'm doing this. So,
But of course you are. But of course you're right.
Well, Meredith, why don't you explain first what a first is?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So I can't take credit for the whole idea. I was inspired, just to give a little background, by this woman named Luann Kahn. For those folks listening who are from or lived in the greater Philadelphia area, you probably know, it's probably a household name. She was an investigative reporter and journalist with NBC 10 for almost 30 years. I believe she's won 8 Emmys. Phenomenal woman. And now she's working at Temple University, my alma mater, which is where we first connected. She was a keynote speaker at a Temple Women's Network brunch. And I received an autographed copy of her book, I Dare Me. And she shared with us her journey of doing something new every day for a year. And that was very inspiring. But at the same time, that book sat next to my bed for a couple months until the first time my now ex-husband and I were in what was a definitive argument. And I picked up the book and I read it in 2 days. And I'm like, I need to do this. So I called Luann on December 1st, 2015. And I said, this is Meredith. We met at the brunch. I'm so moved. And she said, I'll tell you what, Meredith, 1 month from today, I want you to join me as my special guest, where my journey of first began, doing the polar bear plunge in Atlantic City. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I thought, go big or go home. If I'm really going to commit to this, if this is something I'm considering for my own life,
Right.
What better way? I believe in living a great story. And this is somebody who I looked up to, very much respected, especially in the professional realm. But she did this. She was a breast cancer survivor. And even though she was feeling stuck, even though she had all these Emmys and this wonderful husband, this beautiful daughter, she has this amazing, amazing life. But she was feeling stuck. And in that point in my life, I feel like I had won every award that I wanted to win. I'd gotten the promotions, I'd made the six figures, I'd done everything, but I was not happy in my marriage. My poetry had kind of stopped at that time, and everything that was lighting me up on the inside was pretty dim, which is why I decided to do this journey of first, which really my definition of first is a little different than Luann's. And I have like certain parameters for mine as well, but essentially it's doing something for the first time. It's either trying a new food, going to a new restaurant, meeting a new person, going to a new place, learning something new. It could, definitely anytime you go somewhere new and travel, but it doesn't have to be so like grandioso, right? There's a lot of days in the year and that gets old real fast too. So it could be something as simple as like on days when I'm snowed in, it was like, oh, well, why don't I try my own facial with avocado and egg whites? Or, like anything that's like, why don't you try brushing your teeth with the opposite hand 3 times a day for the first time? Why don't you try going to work a different way, commuting a different way? Why don't you talk to somebody you would never talk to? And it doesn't have to be as major as like traveling to a new place. Like every single one of us can do this. And that's why I am grateful to have the platform to share it, because so many other people, especially women, are feeling this sense of either being stuck or bored or want to rediscover themselves, no matter what phase in life. I know empty nesters, like this is very big for them too, to be like, well, who am I now?
Right.
So it's like across generations. I feel like all of us can relate to this and almost kind of use it, whether we, may know it or not. I feel like it saved my life and helped me process and work through so much trauma and life events that I I didn't really anticipate, but I'm grateful for.
It's funny, Meredith, like you had shared your story as well as one of your mentors, her story, and you say like she's got what we would see on paper, right? All the Emmys, the relationship, the children, right? All the things that we in this society use as our metrics. And I also loved what you said. For you, like you had won all the awards and you had climbed the ladder, and I think it's such an interesting place. So many high achievers, so many leaders experience is
Yes.
that you get to this place, da 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 da, the place you've been working so freaking hard to get to. And you're saying to yourself, what? Like, I wonder the things that run through our mind. I know for me, it was very much like, okay, I worked so hard to be here and now I'm here. And this and I actually can remember it and I can feel it like on my neck and on my chest. I almost felt like I had a turtleneck, like a wool turtleneck, just like too tight on my neck. Everything that I had worked so hard to do, once I had achieved it, I was like, get me out of here. It was such a weird feeling because I was like, I'm supposed to be like, I don't know, like laying on a chaise lounge being fed grapes because I've like achieved the thing. So I'm curious, like, can you talk a little bit more about like that experience and like what happens when, the way that you're built is as a high achiever and you achieve and you're like, all right, and now what's next? Or I'm done here. Like what tell me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't have this realization until after stepping away from one of my last salaried position and becoming a mom. And upon a lot of reflection at that time, I realized that I was living a life for somebody else.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't like saying I idolized my grandparents, but my father's parents essentially raised me, and Ruth and Leon were like my parents. And my grandpa, um, who was my hero, I know he wanted a certain path for me, and he also helped to get me, the means to get away from an abusive home that I grew up in. And I was always so grateful and I always wanted to make him proud. So it's interesting that like my first job out of college, I ended up at 22 years old at DuPont, at like the DuPont at the international headquarters in Wilmington, Delaware, as the editor of their daily global online newsletter. And it's funny because some of my friends were like, I mean, that's first of all, it's awesome, right? Except some people were like, well, that's kind of a funny fit for Meredith. And it's funny because he was an engineer and now I'm working for one of the world's largest employers of engineers. And I was a very right brain person in a very left brain company, which was an asset, but it was challenging many, many days. And I realized like, well, who am I? That he passed my sophomore year of college. And I'm like, well, why am I still like living? And I live to make them proud, but I'm
Right.
like, I have to live for myself. And it's like, well, what really, sets my soul on fire? Like I said earlier, what really lights
Right.
me up? And for me, writing has always been that. And I feel like it's only recently I'm really getting back to those roots because I even got lost in the whole, like, you're now a PR person, you're a communications person. And it's like, it was corporate communications by day and performance poetry by night. It was a weird dichotomy, but I felt like I was, I wrote a poem recently where I referred to like feeling like I was putting on a costume every day for 13 years, wearing a suit, taking out, hiding my long, dark, curly hair, taking out my nose ring, putting on a suit, and, being what it meant to be professional. And in those environments, it meant emotionless. And I am an emotional person. I consider myself an HSP, a highly sensitive person slash empath, which I also didn't even know was a thing until becoming a mom. Because I was so set on everything I was like a robot. I was like a robot.
Yeah. But Meredith, it's so interesting as you share that. I'm sure Jen's has some thoughts here. Those two worlds are so different in so many ways, where it's like, and I think it's also alluring, right? Right. When world number one is this professional who you're supposed to be and the identity that's like on your business card. So in many ways, it's a prescription for us. Okay, go be this person. All right, being that person means hair back, nose ring out, suit on. Okay. And then we're rewarded, whether that's, at Christmas time, everybody said, ooh, Meredith, what do you do? Or, we're rewarded by, like you said, you're living for your grandparents and for them to be proud of you, or we're rewarded by our bank account, whatever like gives us this, feedback loop. And then over here, there's this other identity, this other real Meredith that without, which we all do sometimes. Sometimes we're so rewarded in this category that we don't necessarily go over here and say, well, actually, who am I? Like,
Right.
what does that, that nose ring or that my emotions, like, what does that represent? So did you feel like you were like Superman and Clark Kent, where you just flip-flopped between the two? Or did you feel like, that there was this divide?
Yeah, I think it was like a Wonder Woman. I know, but I like the Superman. I like that. It felt like that because literally I was driving and I made the reverse commute from Philadelphia to Wilmington for all those years. And I always said when I crossed that state border on I-95, it was like nose ring out, it literally felt like that's what it felt like. It was like, all right, hair out, nose ring. But the other thing is I was also it's different when you're salaried, and it's different when I was also a company spokesperson. So it was 24/7 type of roles. If something happened 3, 4 in the morning, like it didn't matter. Like I had, especially when I was doing like global issues and crisis communications work, it was around the clock. And that phone, like I always had to keep it on and always next to me. So that was like another layer, is that it was like, even when it was my time, it was never my time. So I loved your turtleneck analogy because that's exactly how I felt. It was like you were suffocating in your own skin. And there's a poem in there somewhere.
I'm sure of it. So what gave you the courage though? Like what gave you the courage because I know that, Meredith wears lots of hats, and one is, you've had an experience of over, 20 years in public relations, and now you do have a communications company. And, so it is a strength of yours, but like, what gave you the courage to allow this other person? I don't want to call it the real you, because there's an authentic you in both versions. But what allowed you to say, I'm going to write my poetry. I'm gonna stand up and I'm gonna speak it out loud. I'm gonna tell my story. Like what
It's an
allowed you to
awesome
do that?
question. It's an awesome question. I'd say my faith, first and foremost. They call it a leap of faith for a reason. I don't always have a safety net, and that's what makes it terrifying, but I do believe you're rewarded for that. I also, anybody who knows me or follows me on social media knows how I am with signs, or these synchronicities where I believe I receive messages, in license plates, in the sky, from animals, um, billboards, all these random interactions. Um, it's hard to kind of explain without diving into. I think that folks who understand what I'm talking about have an understanding. So whether you believe they're messages from angels or deceased relatives, guardian angels, etc., I have always had eyes to see them and didn't really understand. And I started just following them. And I said, I could be here in my brain thinking one thing, but it's like, what am I thinking in my heart? Because that's the first organ, right? Like the first organ that is formed is your heart. And that has actually three brains in it. So maybe if I listen to that more than the brain in my head, and that's where I feel like these signs and my faith keep me coming back to like the heart-centered practice of like, okay, well, yes, this could all be coincidence that I see my deceased grandfather's initials on three license plates in the same day that I had just spoken out loud to him, or, like all these things where it's like, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I feel like following the signs and following the first and tapping into like my intuition, how it feels inside, like something might be terrifying. Like one of my favorite firsts was the moth doing a storytelling slam. And it's terrifying. Like I like still was like trembling getting on stage and said a prayer. And the second I finished, the second I stepped off stage, I hadn't felt more alive that entire year of my life. And I know that feeling. And I think I'm willing to fight for that feeling. And I feel like I also had no other options. It's like when you're feeling like, okay, you did everything, you achieved this, and what's next? Like I don't like operating, from that kind of place. And I also like a little adventure. In my high school, I was voted the most daring. In my elementary school, most courageous and adventurous. And I feel like that's what was missing, was like the adventure. I was in this corporate role where everything was like perfect and robotic, and you can't curse, and you have to sit up straight, and everything is well groomed, and you can't be seen not looking like that off the clock. And I was the only one under age 40 in communications in North America for a few years. And so everyone was pretty much old enough to be my parent, and they hadn't fully embraced social media at that point. So like navigating all of that at the same time, and how yeah, just all of that, it was a lot. But I feel like um when like I feel like I knew that there was a higher calling and purpose. I'm like, this is not the point. Like God hasn't gotten me this far, and it's just I always come back to that. And I feel like I could always see, like when I had these moments as a little girl, I can visualize myself having conversations like this, you
Right,
know,
right.
and being on stage and sharing my truth and getting emotional talking about it, and talking to people about what's real, like you said, like um, the behind the kimono look at what makes us tick and who we are and why we're really here and what we're meant to do.
Yeah, rather than the performative version of ourselves, right?
Yes.
Who we think we have to be and show up as.
I'm sure you've all heard the saying, nothing changes if nothing changes. And that's true. It's really hard to make change in our life without taking the time to actually look at the way that we're showing up in the world and the thoughts that we have that really dictate the way that we show up in the world. That is why we created the 90-day Elevate Journal. You're definitely going to want to grab this, and it's available now on Amazon. The 90-day Elevate Journal is essentially designed for you to take a deep dive into what it really means to rise, transform, and lead. Grab your copy for less than $20. You can always visit www.themindrise.com/elevate or check it out in the show notes. But you need to grab your copy of the 90-day journal now and really elevate to the next level.
And it's interesting, when we have that almost mapped out for us, or we have a role that we're supposed to fulfill, it's sometimes it's kind of easy to fill the role. Okay, this is who I'm supposed to be. The reason I say it's easy is because then I don't have to think about the alternative of like, well, if I wasn't this, then what would I be? Then who would I be?
Yes.
Something's already prescribed for us. And I loved what you shared. And Jen, I'd love to hear your perspective as well, about the signs, right? And whether the signs came as a way, and I'd be curious, like the chicken or the egg, but you start doing these firsts, right? And I could geek out, he's the psychotherapist in me. Like I could geek out about how you're developing new neural pathways by doing first just something as simple as taking a different way to work, right?
Yes.
You start doing those, and then there's these signs at the same time, right? So it sounds like rather than staying on the hamster wheel of like, this is what I do, this is who I am, this is what my business card says, right? It's like you kind of cracked the door open with these firsts. And then in a way, like you said, even being snowed in, you're looking for a first. And even if it is brushing your teeth with the opposite hand, right? And then I think from the cracking of the door, and correct me if I'm wrong, and Jen, I love your perspective too, then you start to open yourself to seeing these signs. And whether the signs are as woo-woo as a deceased family member, or if the signs are just a feather and that represents like you being pointed in the right direction.
I want to share one thing real quick and then pass it to Jen, but I mentioned to her this morning that on my way to drop my daughter to school, there was a van pulling out and it said Bailey with a big smiley face next to it. And I was trying to get my phone out, but I didn't capture it in time. And I was going to take a picture to send to both of you because I knew you were feeling a little under the weather, but I took the sign and the smiley face that we were going to be on today. And here we are.
Yeah.
So with that, so Jen, I know you know all about all of this, and I welcome you to chime in too.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been an inspiration for me, meeting Meredith and how we met. And we actually literally met when she was talking about the first to the instructor when we were all laying back. So I had no idea who was speaking and really what they were speaking about until something kind of piqued my interest. And it was Meredith speaking about a first. I think it was her first time at that yoga farm, and she was sharing that, and it was so super incredible to meet someone who did a first every day. Like Bailey said, I had never myself met anyone who did that, and it was intriguing. And I don't know why, but I did not try to find her after the class. I guess I just kind of like forgot about it, but I think it was like this cosmic like power that was bringing us together, because I ended up tagging the instructor, Brett, and I tagged him in a post of a picture of us, and Meredith saw it, and then she reached out to me and she said, "Were you the one who was interested in my first?" And I was like, "Yes." And I was so glad that we were connected then. And literally since that day, we have never stopped. We talk every single day, and we just are so involved in each other's lives, and we've become such great friends. And she inspires me every day when she's telling me what she'll say, "I haven't really thought of the first yet, what I'm going to do today." And sometimes I'll give her an idea, "Oh, have you ever tried this?" But she gives me ideas, and she's inspired me to kind of like do things in a different way, because so often I think I'm speaking for a lot of people when I say, like, there are many people who just kind of get into that routine and that like the same old, and,
Yes.
like that grind of daily life, and it's like to inject one thing a day that you're doing, that's something new, that's something special, that you are mindfully there and doing, is just, to me, it's just amazing. And so I have benefited so much. And I'm curious, Meredith, for you, I know you have Melody, who's 4. How has doing first impacted her? Because she's 4 years old and she's been doing first probably for most of her life.
Yes, it's how I'm raising her, and in some regards, how she's raising me, if you will. And in itself, like I say, becoming a mom was probably one of my, I shouldn't say probably, that was in my top 3 of my favorite firsts. And coming with that is so many things that I didn't anticipate, in terms of like the child world and realm for me. My daughter's also quite adventurous, but also likes that sense of routine. So it's interesting because, she likes the routine, but it's always like, oh, we're going somewhere new or fun. And it's been really a joy to watch her embrace the journey as well. And really, in the last 4 years, I'd say the majority of my firsts are things either inspired by her or because of her, going to places that I sure as heck would never go as an adult without children. It's also allowed me to heal, a lot of my inner child wounds as well, and to go back to places like I grew up, near where I'm living. I grew up here in Monmouth County, but I left and I was in Philly for 17 years. And I came back when I had her. And I told myself, like, I'd never go back. My brother never did. He moved to Prague and went away, and he hasn't even been in the country. So I can understand, that aspect of like flight and wanting to make a new home and life, which I had done. But I felt like I can't be a mom and be the mom I want to be without addressing some of this stuff. So some of the ones that we've done together, like I went to my childhood home where I grew up, where I was abused, and she was with me for that experience. I ended up posting one day on Instagram a picture of the house. It was 1111, my favorite numbers, and I shared a picture and mentioned something about it, and somebody saw it and they're like, that's my best friend's home. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, in Manasquan? She's like, yeah, right off 71. And I'm like, wow. 2 nights later, I had them over for dinner. We were talking about the house. She was like, well, I think it's haunted. And I'm like, let me tell you why. And several months had passed. This was during, COVID times. But then Melody went with me, and like how amazing and how powerful to bring her. I mean, before I even got to the front door, I was already like hysterically crying, but like to be there and to pray there and burn sage and to be in my childhood bedroom, which was now this young woman's bedroom that she grew up in because her mom bought the house, for my mom. And it's just wild. The whole thing is like wild. And that's what I mean by like just taking these like little inches, like I would say it's like kicking in the door, really, is how it felt, like opening Pandora's box, because by saying yes, and I know there's a lot of concepts about this, like Shonda Rhimes, other folks have these, books about saying yes, but I'd also
Right.
say that it's like Jen used the word mindful, and that's so key in this because it is being mindful. Like for me, it was, yeah, I could try a new food, but like I'm plant-based, so like I'm not going to say, oh, I'm having this dish with a meat I haven't eaten because I'm not eating that meat, for example. Or if it's gonna mess with my beliefs, like I'm not gonna allow it to like knock me from my core belief system. At the same time, it's important to like stretch yourself and get to know and learn and educate, but like being sure in yourself. So the first, really, some of the criteria is that it has to benefit. This is what I use: my mind, body, my mental, physical, spiritual, or emotional bodies. That's really like, so that's what it counts as a first. So when I say meeting a new person, but it's meeting a new person and having a conversation that uplifts my spirit, for example. Like you always know, like I know when I'm done with the first, and I'm like, sometimes I don't plan it. So sometimes obviously most days I work on being mindful and doing something like that, but then there are times where the universe just has its way and it's like, oh shit, that was a first. That was like that really just happened. Or like I know in my soul, like that was an interaction that was meant to happen. And really most of the people in my life now are people I have met or connected with as part of first. And what's like really awesome is when it's compounded. And like the event where I met Bailey, it was my first time at a source symposium. And so since then I'd continued to go to this. And each time I go, I'm like, wow, I met you at a first and you at a first. And the last one, I felt like I knew half the room because I'm like, wow, like you were part of this first, you were part of that first. And people say, Meredith, how do you know everybody? You're like the mayor. And I'm like, because I stretch myself outside of my comfort zone. Like
Right.
and it gets boring. It might be just going into a new store. And when I go in the store, it's not just stepping foot in the store, but like saying hi to the owner and getting to know them and why they opened a business. You know what I mean? It's the little things that aren't really little things.
Right. Right.
That's so
Right.
cool. I have another question. Do you memorialize your first, or how do you have a list of things that you want to get to someday or kind of thing? Or like, what do you do when something like an unexpected first comes up?
That's an
Do you
awesome
write it
question.
down?
I wish I had a more streamlined approach. So I'm old school, I keep a journal. So I do journal them. Some of them are shared that way or documented and memorialized, some on Instagram. It used to be I'd share them on Twitter. And then when I was on Snapchat, I shared them on Snapchat. Now that I moved to Instagram, on Instagram. Back then I even said like, oh, I wish I, had this site, but for more, it was really for me. It was not for other people. But the one thing is I take photos. So I have, I don't know, probably like 80,000 photos from the last, whatever, 7 years of doing firsts. And I always said, look, let me just take a photo of it. if I could, because again, like when I first started this, it was really like, I ended up going through a divorce and then getting a personal injury and having a life-threatening blood clot. And, it was like my first MRI, my first time in blood thinners, first time in physical therapy. So in addition to being the director of communications and marketing at the Philadelphia Bar Association and the president of the Philadelphia Public Relations Association. So back then my life really like wasn't my, oh, and I feel like the photos back then, I'm more mindful now of writing them and also sharing like fun tidbits about it. I look forward to one day turning it into a book and kind of wrapping my arms around what I had put on Twitter and Instagram and in my journal and in the photos. And I'm okay with it. I believe you have to live things first to write about them later. So that's where I landed, and being kind and gentle to myself instead of being like, well, why didn't you do this? And it's like, well, shit, I had a pretty full plate. And the fact that I'm even doing this is like, so that's where I landed.
Yeah, it was a great question, Jen. I was actually just thinking the same thing. But Meredith, do you have a list of like a buck? Like, are you bucket
Oh,
list?
yes. Yeah. So I am. I'm like, so that's like the Ruthie, my grandma Ruthie. Everything is list, every day, list, list, list. So I have two different like first bucket lists. One I keep on a whiteboard, a marker board in my kitchen. The other one I keep on my phone. Because sometimes it'll be in the moment and I'll just add it and then I'll like transcribe it and add it to that. And it feels so great. I love crossing things off. I'm one of those people. I love checking them off, but it's evergreen because there's always places that I want to go. So instead of being like, oh, I wish I had gone, it's like, all right, throw it on the list, throw it on, and then when I have those boring days, it's like, okay, well, what can I tackle? Is it something I can do with my daughter? Is it something I can do without my daughter? Is it a self-care thing? Is it a travel thing? Do I have to plan it out? How bad do I really want it? I recently took my daughter to Please Touch Museum in Philadelphia, which was really cool for me because I interned there almost 20 years ago. And like that was another full circle moment to be able to be there experiencing it with her, knowing the history and background and having already a connection to the organization and its leadership. So that was very fun. So I love the ones that benefit both of us and that are just kind of there for, maybe a day off of school type of thing.
Right. So before we wrap up, I'd love to talk about resilience. I mean, we all have a life journey, and sometimes for some of us, we've lived like 8 lifetimes in just one. And I know that you've navigated some of the things that, would typically be under the category of some of the hardest things, whether that is, from divorce to, unexpected pregnancy, launching your own business, losing a parent, growing up in abusive household situation. So, Meredith, even like when I say the word resilience, like how most people would read, the things that you've navigated, which are more than most people go through in a whole life, and say, oh my God, like, so what allows you to keep your head above water? Like, how do you define resilience? How do you embody resilience?
Wow. It's funny. I have to tell you that I almost named my company Presilience. So resilience with a capital PR. But to me, from the feedback I received, it sounded more like the issues in crisis communications work versus what I'm doing now. So I didn't go that route, but I have always seen myself, like it's the word I identify with a whole lot. My whole life, even in elementary school and in my old yearbooks, people say, you're the strongest person I know, you're the strongest person I know. Like I've always heard that. And it's kind of funny because the mug that I'm drinking out of right now says strong women raise strong women.
True.
But I also have come to know that there's a thing called toxic independence too, which is something I realized and I fell under. So it's like a delicate balance. I feel like how I embody it is doing what I do every day, getting up and taking care of my daughter and making sure that she has the best life possible. And, being a single mom is definitely the hardest yet most rewarding job, if you will. I don't like saying the word job, but responsibility that I have ever carried. And this is, somebody who was a spokesperson for chemical plants in New Jersey and beyond. So that's, I'm not saying that lightly. But I feel like I said, I think of things really like on a macro level and outside of myself and believing in like a higher purpose and calling. I always felt like I was meant to be a mom. I always felt like I'm supposed to have my melody. I always felt like what I'm supposed to live for is beyond myself. So even though I've dealt with a lot of tough things and really do feel like I have lived many lifetimes in less than 4, I'm almost 40, but I think about it and I'm like, wow, like, even just from a career perspective, or even from like the life perspective, and I'm just like, wow, that was a lot packed in, upon reflection. So what keeps me going is feeling like I am nowhere near where I am meant to be. And I feel like there's much bigger plans, and there's a higher calling. And it's like, I say that without ego, but it's like, I couldn't have gone through this just for me to experience it. You know what I
Right.
mean? And now I'm realizing, like, I do believe these are God-given gifts of communication and writing. And I'm not meant to continue to use those gifts to serve those who are already very well off, so I'm at a point now where I'm like, how can I use them to serve and to, as cliche as it sounds, like really make the world a better place.
Yes, 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 absolutely. So, as we wrap up, tell everybody about community, and where they can find you on the World Wide Web.
Sure. Community, I say community. It's
Yep.
spelled community by Mza. That's my initials, MZA.com. Or you could feel free to find me also under the same name, Community by Mza, on Instagram. My email is MZA at communitybymza.com. Upon years of being in-house public relations communications, after becoming a single mom, I realized I needed more flexibility, and I could go back to that grind, but I wanted to be the one to raise my daughter myself, and the way that I see best to raise her. So a lot of folks have said, for years, like, why don't you just do your own thing? Why don't you do your own thing? It was something I didn't have interest in until the last few years. And now I mainly work with entrepreneurs and small business owners within the wellness worlds, holistic health, wellness, healing, anyone from yogis to doulas, counselors, etc., and beyond. Again, tapping into the spirit of the first. Folks, I like to work with folks who help others improve their mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional bodies. So that's how, like, every day, and paying homage to the first by working with folks who help folks within those realms. And whether it's helping them communicate their messaging, maybe what they think it is isn't what it necessarily should be, identifying their key target audiences, helping with the language for their website, for their speeches, prepping some folks for maybe media interviews. A lot of folks, as I'm sure you know, are not comfortable doing podcasts, are not comfortable sitting here and having a conversation, sharing stuff like this. And a lot of times it may take somebody to coach them, or counsel them, and help them identify what are your key messages, what are you trying to convey, even practicing with folks. That's what I think a lot of people don't realize, is a lot of these executives and people I work with, they might seem so well polished on the screen, but they don't see, like I said, the person with the post-its in the background saying, this is the right answer, or like, sit up more, smile more, don't, that literally was my job for a long time. And now I'm working on embracing it and embracing being my own client, as well as helping those who help others, because most of those folks, most independent folks, don't have a budget for a communications director themselves, or a marketing person, and maybe can't afford somebody throughout the year, but to have somebody help them with that as they see fit is something that I have been enjoying and look forward to doing more of. And I can sleep well at night knowing that what I'm doing aligns with what I believe in.
Right. And at the end of the day, isn't that what it's all about? Right.
Amen.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Meredith, thank you so much for being with Jen and I for today. It's so,
Thank
so
you.
grateful to have you here. We'll make sure for everybody who's listening that we are going to throw all of the links and the emails and all the things for you to check out into the show notes. And if you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe and even give us a review. 5 stars, always appreciated. On Apple, Spotify, YouTube. We're hanging on YouTube so you can watch us, as well as Google Play. I always forget Google Play. And remember, I'm like, know that there's 4. All right, guys, thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll catch you on the next episode.